That's fine.
So hi, Stephanie. Hi, Angelica. So this is the breakout room about teen mental health. I don't know if you guys have any questions.
I do have a question. Should I shoot? Okay. So in my library, we've been talking about mental health quite a bit over the last few years and trying to figure out where we can have an impact. So I just barely heard about this project yesterday through a YALSA email and was like, oh, good, I have time to come. So I thought it was an interesting idea of a way to engage youth in talking about mental health, but something that we have been trying to figure out is that typically we are intended to be sharing resources and not necessarily coaching around mental health. So my question is like, what are the boundaries that were used in this project? And like, how much could you talk about mental health? How far could you go? What limitations did staff have?
Yeah, I don't know, Paula, do you want to, we didn't really discuss how we were going to answer, but that was a big question for me entering this project, especially because in my work, I have especially worked with youth in crisis a lot of time. And so going in, it was a big concern because I was just like, I have helped youth through crisis, and I don't know if I did the best. You always just do the best that you can, right? But we're not actually, I wasn't actually trained to do that work, right? So I think that a big thing that came from, or made me feel a little bit better, which is like something I think Paula mentioned, and Caitlin, it's just like this idea of mental health being on that spectrum. And that really opened up my view into like how it just brought a lot more comfortability going in, but also the idea of practicing mental health every day, or like kind of just inserting it into programs, I think what happens is that you start very small, right? Because if you're not a trusted adult, right, they're not going to share with you, and they're not going to, maybe somebody who's having a crisis, right, may just reach out to whoever's near them. But in this situation, when you're creating these relationships, like you're starting small and inserting mental health into all your kind of programming or check-ins or however you are doing it, create space for youth to hopefully talk or engage with you before a mental health crisis kind of occurs. And I'm not saying that that's not going to happen, but I think that what I've learned through this is just like you kind of start small by talking with youth, and kind of creating those relationships so that they feel like they can go to you before it becomes bigger. So that's one of the things, but we didn't have any clear cut, like, these are the boundaries. I think it's just like, we were just kind of navigating in the way that we are supposed to just kind of like first come, like, every situation was different, right? And every youth was different. And how you kind of entered that relationship is different, or what you did in that relationship. But we were also prepared with a lot of resources. Like we made sure that we had like people that we could contact or help the youth contact, just in case it did go in a direction where they may need more help than we can provide. But also I think like saying, I'm monopolizing this, Paul, and I'm really sorry, but I'll finish up. And so I think just saying also, like, when you're sharing, I think I pointed out, like, it's so important for adults to point out where they are with their mental health, because then that also created this way of like, sometimes we all show up to events or programs where we're like, I am not all here today and I'm having a rough day. And to be able to communicate that to your teen participants, I think is also like a helpful thing, because it shows them like, oh, okay, this person, this adult is indicating to me that it's okay to say I'm showing up in this way. So I don't, yeah, I'm going to leave it to Paula. Sorry. Paula, you're on mute.
Oh, can you guys hear me now? Okay, great. Okay. I would say that the biggest thing is that I think there were like 9 of us total who were in this sort of cohort as we were going to the 3 locations. And I think I don't remember who first asked it, but someone, it might've been Shelly, might've been someone else, was like, I cannot handle a teen in crisis. Not, I can't handle it, but like, what do I do? That's not my job. This is scary. And the first thing Elin said was, none of you are professionals. You are not expected to be professionals. You are not intended to be professionals. That is not your role in this process, which was very comforting for, I think, everyone, including myself, because I think everyone who works in a public library is expected to be the doctor, the lawyer, the accountant, the mechanic, the everything to everyone, as opposed to, as you said, just sharing resources. So part of what we did one of the first things we did was have a session with Elin talking about teen mental health. She really introduced that idea of the spectrum. And we talked a lot about that. And about how, like, yes, there are kids who are in crisis, and there is likely to be someone who is in crisis at some time, because we were meeting with kids for like 6 to 8 months. It was a long, long project. And, the likelihood of someone having a moment of crisis in that it's possible, So having those resources to be able to refer someone to whatever service and whatever support they would need, so that we are part of the social security blanket that someone has. But we are not the only one, we are alerting them to other services. But I think the other piece of it too, and it's totally stupid. I work with children and teens. So I always sort of go back to the fact that, like, to me, and the way that I deal with it is I look at teens, and teens are just like more eloquent 3-year-olds that, like, they still have to, like, that they get overwhelmed by things. And then you have breakdowns because they're overwhelmed by things and they're not quite sure how to talk about them or process them. So the way that I kept thinking about it for myself, not for anyone else, but like literally for myself, as I would walk into this, is I would mentally picture those really, really silly, posters with like 12 or 15 or 20 different facial expressions with like what they mean underneath them, that are for like toddlers or young children to sort of like begin to understand how to recognize emotions and stuff, and really think about like myself and what I'm thinking. And then like how the fact that, like, as kids get older, they start talking less and less about, at least to me, about how they're actually feeling, you know what I mean? Like, and so really thinking about, like, this is a process and a space for us to, or this is really a program in a place and space for us to really open those doors that really dive into, well, how are you actually feeling? And what do you actually do when you feel that way? You know what I mean? Like, and what does that mean? And that I think was like really, really eye-opening. And like, and that's that, part of it is that relationship piece and really building that relationship. And then I think the most amazing thing that I've not seen that I saw in this program, which was that the kids, we use Discord as a manner to interact with the kids and the teens, sorry, I keep calling them kids, interact with the participants. But watching them take over that space and really make it their own and interact with each other, beyond the boundaries of the program. And most of the teen programs that I've done in person, I've done a fair share. The kids, and these were kids who had not met before. They were kids from all across the city who had very little in common beyond the fact that they were all participating in this program. So none of them knew each other beforehand. But they all created relationships with each other in ways that I have not experienced or seen in in-person programming in the same manner. So it was really it was really fascinating. And I don't know if like us talking about mental health supported that, although I think it did, because it really sort of required everyone, the adults and the youth who are participating, to be really honest with each other, and to really sort of like break down some of those walls, which really helped create that sense of community, which was great. Does that answer your question, Stephanie?
It helped. Thank you.
It's so when you say that like you're only supposed to give access, does that mean that like they don't want you to talk about mental health? Or
I don't think that's true, but it's so like we've had trainings around like suicide prevention and things like that. And the trainings that we've had are more like listen, and it's like that algae like process, like you're listening, you're trying to validate, and you're like referring. So, but of course we have situations where our librarians are seen as a trusted adult, and so they're the one that is being told about something terrible that's happened. And so we're trying to figure out, like, we can't take ourselves out of that. Like, we're always going to have youth that need us and that ask us for that support, and who don't feel safe using some of those other sources. And so it's like we're trying to walk this fine line of not trying to be a therapist, or but make sure that they are safe. But that's an example of a crisis situation. So
no, absolutely. And the other thing we sort of talked about, we never really got into, because it wasn't the focus of this, is like, how do you actually support the staff who are supporting the teens? And again, not the focus of this project, but I always think back to the that old trope that every therapist has a therapist. And I always feel like every librarian needs a therapist, because if only for what we see in our jobs, because we see everything. Yeah.
As you were speaking, Stephanie, you could see both Paula and I like nodding and shaking our heads exactly. Like, I have been in that situation before many times, where it's just like, my whole job is to create relationships with teens, and teens are going to come to me with what's going on with them. And that is my job, literally. And I had a manager just be like, well, that's not your job. And it's just like, but this is my job. Like, I'm building relationships with teens. This is going to happen. And so, like, I will say that during that situation, it involved, and also at the desk, just being at the reference desk multiple times, that particularly in like a 6-month span, I had multiple youth come to me with suicidal thoughts, and I, it was a lot, and I know that we are all dealing with that too. And I will say that one thing that helped was that, we all come from different library systems, right? And we all have different kinds of supports, right? At the Seattle Public Library at that time, we had a social worker on staff. So I went to the social worker and was just like, okay, this is something that I keep seeing. And what do I, like, when you're in that situation, the thing that you sometimes do, right, is freeze, because you're just like, okay, what am I supposed to do here? And I think that by talking with her, we kind of devised and it wasn't just happening to me, like, it was other people on desk who, teens would come up to, and it wouldn't be teens that we would know. A few teens I did know. And so it was just like this hard place. But what we did was I know this sounds silly, but we kind of came up with a script of like, if this happens while you're at desk, here is like here are the words that you can say. Here is the people that you call. Here is the process of it. And when you have that process, I think that helped me out greatly, just knowing like, okay, here is something that is scripted that I can kind of just read through. And I have already this process of like, these are the steps that I'm going to be taking this youth through. So I do highly recommend like kind of And if you don't have a social worker on staff, I'm maybe a community partner who maybe sees the same youth you do can kind of work together to maybe kind of create something like that, so that staff are just a little bit more like, okay, this is what I can do in this situation, because it's really off-putting. You're caught off guard. You don't know what to say. So that's just a thought.
Yeah. The other thing I would say is that I have not experienced teens expressing suicidal thoughts. When I was working at one of the locations, I had a number of teens who were very, very food insecure and experiencing some levels of unhoused life. And it's one of those things that, especially for food insecurity, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I always just want to be like, well, I'll just buy you lunch, or I'll just, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't solve a problem. It actually is very detrimental. I do not recommend doing something like that. But my always first instinct is, well, I will, you know what I mean? Like, do I have snacks? Do I have cracker? You know what I mean? Like, what can I give you in this moment to at least, get you some nutritious and something, some calories. What we ended up doing is I'm in DC. I didn't say that. I work in DC Public Library. And there are some government agencies that can do some work, but actually more than that, there are a lot of community organizations. And so we worked with at one of the locations, we actually ended up working with them so that organization would come to the library every Tuesday evening and work with kids, like register them in their support networks and provide them with food in the moment, but also like set up for additional places to get food and some clothing and some other other things that you need that's not just food if you need food. And work with, like, we have Martha's Table and some other places for food pantries and other things like that. But really sort of diving into what is available and what will welcome teens without adults with them. You know what I mean? And like sort of support them in that process. And I wonder also, depending on where you are and like how functional your government is, which is a weird way to say it, but if the HHS department has any resources or anything that like specifically deals with teens, like that might be another place to look for access and support for both the teens, but then also your staff, for the staff who are working with them. So Anthony, Jenny, do you guys have any other questions as well? Or Stephanie, do you have any other questions?
Yeah, I'm nodding along over here too with everything you're saying about, of course, it's my job to be the dumping ground for some of this mental health crisis stuff come from teens. And one thing I've been really worried about trying to start a group that has been asked for by my kids, which would be like a place to talk about tough topics like parents' divorce and things like that, is not only that I'm not an expert, but that the kids aren't experts. And I think I feel more confident in one-on-one than I do in a group where the kids might be giving each other bad advice or leading each other into a unhealthy conversation of some kind or something. And I don't know that I have the tools to deal with that. Is that something that you found was happening at all?
No, but I will say that I think that this kind of, this kind of all ties in, and it points to the fact that we're not experts, right? And as not experts, I think that we have to seek out experts to help us. So if you know of any, but I think that, online has really opened up in this idea of like, we can contact experts, not just right in our backyards. It can be anywhere. And I would say that if you are going through a program where you're unsure of a topic, I would find an expert. And I don't know how your funding is. This is also, right, is a big part of it. Sometimes it's just like, can you pay them for their time? Or can you work with a community group that you've already worked with before who has professionals who know about that topic? So like that's just a thought that I think that, I mean, you might have already explored or have already thought about, but I think
a little bit.
Yeah, I think that sometimes, like, even when I go to trainings, sometimes I think the best trainings are not library trainings. They're trainings with people in different fields, because if they're all working with teens, we're all coming up with similar situations, right? And we're all working, working with, you could be working with the same exact teens, and they could be going right over to them and being like, this is what I need, right? So even if you can maybe even form a little collective of other experts, right, who are working with these teens too, that might be a good place to like get more people in the room and to get more experts in the room. And then you can kind of all kind of discuss what's going on in the various parts of these teens' lives, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to see you both shake your head that you didn't run into any like messy situations like that. That's my fear. Not that it wouldn't happen ever, but.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, and I think it was really interesting because we had one specific situation that could have become messy. We had one of the participants came out as non-binary and changed their pronouns and names in the middle of the program. So that could have been messy. You know what I mean? There could have been a lot of pushback, but there wasn't. Everyone was really accepting, and it was a non-issue. Like no one even, you know what I mean? It was like everyone just rolled with it. There was no like pushback or even, I want to say like actually acknowledgement. You know what I mean? It was like everyone just changed the name they were calling them, you know what I mean? And moved on and changed the pronouns, which is really kind of cool. Because it was a space where people felt comfortable and that everyone was able to sort of be themselves and express themselves. And the other thing, Jenny, I would say like reach out and see what other like teen community, like conversation community groups there might be happening. And even in unexpected places, because I don't know if you have a Planned Parenthood in the local community, but they actually do a lot of teen education. And they might have some resources to do sort of something similar to what you're talking about, or be able to support something along like, something like that group. You know what I mean? If that makes sense. So there's some other places to look for support too.
Yeah, thank you. I'm actually working with our Planned Parenthood right now. We're going to have some restrictions, but one of my programs is a Queer Straight Alliance, and they're going to visit.
Yeah, cool. Juan, do you have any questions you'd like us to talk about?
No, I don't have any questions. Let's see. Well, I have a question. So, and I think Shelley talked about this. It's like you personally, what was like the change, like if you think about when you came in and your sort of like relationship to mental health and where you are now, what was that change?
I mean, I can speak to that shortly, or succinctly-ish, which is that like, we started this in the middle of the pandemic, and I personally was in a moment of crisis and also deep denial. So one of the things that happened to me while we were going through this process is I actually went through a lot of burnout. I'm happy to, this is fine to be recorded. I went through a lot of burnout and actually like recognition that I had spent a lot of time neglecting my own mental health, because it was easier to not focus on it than actually try to deal with it. And I think one of the things that was really sort of like highlighting for me about that was when we talked about self-care with the teens, like the teens were on it, man. Like they all knew exactly what they did to like make themselves feel more comfortable, brighten their moods, work through their problems, you know what I mean? Like, and like deal with their stressors. And I was over there being like, wait a second, y'all go for runs, you don't just like eat ice cream? Like what? So it was really, really interesting to really see like how mature their process was, and their knowledge of like their self-knowledge and reflection of what they needed in order to really continue living a positive, fruitful life, which is really kind of amazing, at least. And that was my personal journey through mental health in this process. So it's pretty cool. I don't know, but Shelly, Juan?
I also shared a little bit in this group, but just the idea of, again, I also work with, in my pastoral youth, experiencing homelessness and housing instability as my main group of youth that I worked with. And with that, it does involve a lot of crisis. And so I was not hesitant, but I was wary going in. And this is part of it, is just like, we need to talk about mental health. And that's what it kind of made me realize. Like, I'm like, by not doing it, it's doing a disservice to both me and youth. And this project really helped me be like, no, you can do this any old time, any old way. I was already doing it in a lot of ways, but this kind of just going through it and just keep adding it to what you're already doing is just so important, because then it normalizes it, which is what a big part of this project was destigmatizing mental health. And I think that, it just really empowered me to like, be like, no, it doesn't have to be scary. And it's not all, and like, yeah, youth can enter crisis, and that's going to happen. And thinking back again about that mental health as a spectrum, they could be in crisis for a few days, for longer than that, but they will also oscillate through the spectrum, and they're not always going to be there. And that helps me to realize, like, okay, like they're here now, but they will oscillate back and forth. And I don't know, there was something about that idea. And also the mental health as a spectrum really resonated with the youth as well. They were all, not all, I mean, maybe some knew about it already, but most, I think, were like, oh, wow, that's really, not thinking of it as a binary, I think is like really revelatory. And yeah.
Yeah, for me, it was kind of like the permission to talk about it, right? Like you felt that, okay, we can say, we can just name it. For me, that was really key. And also, I also think that people whisper mental health. And right, because I was a little hesitant at the beginning. And then through this project, I learned what you've been saying, that it was like, it's okay. I can say, you know what, this is what I'm thinking about mental health. And then also what I thought about it was like, this thing about like metaphors was like really great for me. That is like, I know that, during therapy, sometimes people, I was talking about like, think about these things in this way. And then when I was like, oh, the kids are creating this thing, which is about destruction and release, I can use that metaphor. There are metaphors that are useful for you to deal through, to just, deal with some mental health issues. And in checking in with yourself, right? Like, because when I was helping the kids to go to that space, I was also making myself aware that I could go right to that space. So it was really great. I did learn a lot.
We did get a question from Stephanie that sounded, it sounded like there was maybe an application process for youth to participate. What was anything in the application that talked about mental health or guardian consent? Also, do you have group agreements used during your sessions? I don't know if you want to speak first, Paula, or.
Sure. So in DC Public Library, and I believe as well in Seattle, we did have application We use them for two things. One, to check the ages of participants, because even if you say that it's for teenagers, you know, the 9-year-olds are going to apply, and it has VR equipment, which means the 22-year-olds are also going to apply. And we wanted to make sure that we were actually getting teenagers. And then in that same way, we wanted to be aware of whether or not it was going to be upper teenagers, lower teenagers, a mix, just so we have an understanding of who's going to be in the room with everyone together. And the other thing with that too is we had a couple sentence answers, and we read them, but we read them more as like, partially why are you here, but also more, if you're actually going to fill out an application, you're more likely to actually attend for the full length of the program, as opposed to, because especially the other thing is we gave them all VR equipment and Chromebooks. Like it's an expensive program the way we ran it, because we had the grant, which is, I mean, it was an amazing experience for us and the teens that they got to keep that. You know what I mean? Like this is a thing they continue to do. It's amazing. So they did need guardian consent because we were recording for the research stuff. And we also did have group agreements at the beginning of each session. And Juan, I don't know if you want to say anything.
Yeah, no, I think we had some agreements, you know, about like being in a compassionate space. We always talk about that, right? We always brought up the idea, you know, participation, that we encourage you to participate. We talk about, I think, step back and step up, right? That idea of like, if you're if you fade in the back, you know, step up. I like the use of like make space and take space instead of this step back and step up. But those things we always had. And I think as the relationship builds, because we had 6 months with them, you know, we create a certain connection, like relationship building. It's key for co-design, right?
And also with the agreements, those are always like living documents. So always making sure to check in, to be like, are these still good? Do we need to add anything? Do we need to think about anything? Just thinking about that.
Okay, I'm gonna go, okay? I gotta check, see you.
As you all were talking, oh, sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna say we have some new people in the group too. But Jenny, you had a question? I think that was who.
Yeah. As you were talking about impacts, you know, on staff and yourself, I'm realizing that one of my other big questions was if you can talk about what you saw as impacts on teens, if anything, that were not the participants in the program. So I'm interested in the ripple effect in my community, since it does sound like a really great experience for the teens who get to be part of it, but obviously that's a small fraction, right?
I'll speak a little bit to this just to begin, is that like, I think the ripple effects were more in how we design programs and welcome people into our spaces, and sort of what we expect of the teens and children too, because it's in DC, it's like one department, when we work cross spaces. So what we expect of them and their when they're in the spaces, if that makes sense. So it's at some of the libraries in DC, we've started using like question of the days on like a whiteboard as we go. I'm still working on setting that up in the library I work in now. And those questions could be something similar to the one that Shelley mentioned at the beginning about, like, describe your mood as the weather, or using weather terms, and just sort of like giving everyone in the community or everyone in that space an opportunity to take a couple minutes or take some seconds to reflect on how they're feeling. There are some really great couple minute or couple second even very short exercises that Elin put together, and then Shelley shared in one of the videos that's on our website, or will soon be on the website, for quick check-ins with teens. And so I think the ripple effect is really sort of the interaction and the creation of space for the entire community of youth in the library. Does that make sense? And Shelley, do you want to add anything?
No, I think that what you're saying does make sense. The only other thing that I think that we also thought a lot, and the youth that, at least in Seattle, thought a lot about, is just like how those experiences that they created are experienced. So I think that would be like, as far as I know, we don't have any information about that, but they thought a lot about, like, if people were coming into this experience that we created, are we creating a positive mental health space? And we also talked a lot about how different people need different things to create positive mental health for themselves. Some people want loud, angry music. Some people don't want music at all. Some people want soft music. So that idea, I would just be really interested to see, like, if we could actually ask people who experience the virtual realities that were created, what comes to them. Did it improve their mental health? I think that would be really fascinating to kind of learn more about. But as far as I know, we don't have that information. I see that we have a few new participants. Are there any questions that you all have? Thanks, Stephanie. Thank you for all your questions. They're great. Why did you all hop into this room? Is there any questions that you had, or any thoughts that you're, what do you think that we would be discussing in here is another question I have.
I mean, I wanted to give others a chance, but I do have more stuff to ask. That's okay. So one of the things that I'm thinking about a lot too is just that mental health is an umbrella term that encompasses so much. And I was wondering if you noticed with the kids, if they thought of it that way too, in a big umbrella term, or if they tended more towards the bubble bath spa day kind of like rest your brain kind of definition, or the like, I have to treat my anxiety disorder kind of definition, or even this, more significant diagnoses like schizophrenia.
Like, that was not, I don't know if it was at Seattle or in Texas, but that is not a thing that we explored at all with the teens. They've never brought up or really talked about that way. Yeah. And I think because of that, it really was that broad term, because they weren't, yeah.
I think that's my experience too. I've constantly asking my advisory board kids like what their big issues are, and they say mental health. And it does seem like they kind of just mean my brain feels bad sometimes and I want it to stop.
Yeah, it's that stress, that like the basic routine, the debilitating because it's routine stress, everything's, and anxiety and all those things of just, being a teenager.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, if you want to, like, one of the activities that I really enjoyed is that and this wasn't even through, I forgot how we even did it. I think it was just like on a presentation board, right? It was just like, okay, you have an empty room. It's completely empty. What would you put in that room that would make you feel calm? And thinking about it in that way, like, again, that brings to the table that different youth do need different things in order to get there. But you can change the word calm, right? I think maybe what you're talking about is like this mental health is this big term, right? But what does mental health mean to each individual in that room? And I think that part of the work that we went through was kind of answering that for each of the youth. And maybe we didn't actually, you know, write down their answers, but I think just asking youth what their idea of mental health is can be just an experience in and of itself, to really get down to what they actually really mean by what they're saying. I think when we were, again, interviewing librarians around like what was happening around mental health when they experienced it, and one of them really strongly said, like, none of the kids in the room had been asked questions about mental health in the way that they were asked, right? And I think it's really just giving youth time to kind of think about what mental health means to them and giving them time to reflect, oh, when I'm in a bad mood, I do things to help me. And sometimes they just don't make those connections. And I think part of what the work that we were doing was trying to help them make those connections and giving them the space to think about what mental health really is to them and what it actually means.
Yeah, thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I have been thinking of it as kind of like this too big of a question to answer, and therefore it's really intimidating. And I like thinking of it as everybody's answering for themselves, even if you're not like going down the list and being like, all right, what you got? Diagnoses? What you got? What do you feel? Yeah, thank you.
Or anything you want to contribute to the conversation about teen mental health?
We're also happy to read things through chat if you don't really want to speak. I totally understand. And then it also looks like we're going back to the main room in a minute. So, any fast burning questions? Well, thank you all. And just let us know. I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions offline too. If you want my email address, I'm happy to give it to you and we can chat.